All right, I guess we'll get started. Pretty light group today, I guess. That's okay. We're getting towards the end. I imagine you guys are getting bombarded with assignments and stuff like that. You should be working on assignment 2 for us, hopefully. Shouldn't be too bad, though. It's pretty easy. It seems pretty quick to me. Take you maybe, I don't know, maybe a couple hours tops. That's with looking stuff up. If you're pretty comfortable with JavaScript, it might take you about 15 minutes. It's really not a big thing. That being said, last week I was away ill. Hopefully you watched the video on prototypes. Don't be too nervous about prototypes. So the final is not next week, but the following week, right, on the 14th. The final, there will be prototypes on the final. However, everything to do with prototypes will be on this page. So either you access it through the Netlify or you access it by your own files. But either way, all the information you need about prototypes will be on this page. All right? So don't feel too nervous about prototypes. So today we're going to talk a little bit about JSON. Basically taking a look at the structure of JSON, why we use JSON over XML, basically data structures and how we pass them. And then we're going to look at APIs. We're going to build a very basic API, which means you guys are going to get a new tool on your belts. We're going to set up a Netlify account and basically deploy our stuff to GitHub, which will auto-deploy to Netlify, and set up our own little website server kind of thing that will distribute our API. So a little bit of experience today. That'll be cool. I did this on Tuesday, and it took like an hour and a half to set up Netlify. So I think I might do it a little bit different today, just because it seemed like it needed a little bit more, I don't know, what's a better term than hand-holding? It just needed a little bit more guidance. That's a better word. Guidance in setting it up. Also, like, how many of you have ever like forked a branch in Git before? Okay. You guys have cloned, right? Okay, cool. And you've done push and pull, right? Does anybody here not know what staging means? Okay. You have staged, you just don't realize you've done it. And then, and you know what commit is, right? You know what obviously commit is. I think we're also going to do just a quick rundown of what the different steps are when you use Git. I guess most instructors, when they do Git, either A, they assume you already know it, or B, they kind of glazed over the absolute bare minimum of what you needed to know in order to push a repository. That was basically it. But Git is really powerful, and there's a ton of stuff that you can do with it. And the other concern I kind of have is, how many of you have co-ops for next semester? Yeah. How many are working for developers next semester? A few of you? Okay, yeah. And I'm guessing they probably use Git. And the one huge thing you're going to want to know how to do is fork a branch, because they're not going to let you deploy to master. There's no way in hell. So understanding how to do that would be beneficial. And then I also, in the summer semester, at least if you get me, almost 100% of our assignments and projects and labs are group work. So obviously it's optional. You can work in a group or not, but a lot of people choose to because the assignments are pretty big. That being said, you don't want to wind up, pushing your changes over your friends' changes and knocking out the work they did, because they're going to get pissed off, right? So maybe we'll take a look a little bit at Git today, just some basic stuff to kind of catch you up. Okay, so for the object prototypes, I can recap. I don't really want to. We talked about function constructors, and we talked about using object literals to create prototypal chaining. I know we kind of basically ended class early last week just because it was just too much. It was just so much stuff. Not last week, the week before. I do recommend watching the video if you haven't watched it, which based on the views you haven't. So I recommend watching the video and just make sure you're kind of caught up on what this is before the test, because even though this page is available during the test and you're able to access all this data if you remember the first test we did, you don't have tons of time, so if you don't know what you're looking for or where to find it, you're going to have a bit of difficulty, right? So just make sure you're familiar, at least, with what the words are and where to find them. All right, let's get started. So if you could go to week 12 inside Blackboard and just pull down the starter files for me, that would be great. Get those uncompressed and on your, wherever you're going to put them, desktop, documents folder, whatever. And once you do that, we're going to start with the part 1. And you're going to notice the structure of this is a little different than usual. It's kind of difficult to see because I can't enhance the size of my file navigation inside my IDE. But it starts off with the top folder being JSON APIs part 1, JSON APIs part 2. And then down in that same root folder, you'll see the main.js. That's the JS file that I'm using to do all of my stuff in. And then you'll also notice a file called data.json. And that's the file we're going to work with first. Open that up. You'll notice there's already a ton of stuff in there. Do me a favor and on your keyboard, hit Command-A or Control-A and delete. And save it. So that you have an empty data.json file. I mean, if you want to keep it and just go along, that's totally fine too. It's totally up to you. I kind of learn better when I type it out. But all right, so this is the wrong lesson. We want this one. Oh, also one more thing about the test on, not next week, but the following week in week 14. I would bookmark this Netlify. It is under the resources. Sorry, the resources. It's under the resources under weekly learning. But everything we've done that will be on the final is sitting up there inside that Netlify. And that's where you'll find all these wonderful notes. And then you can, do fun things like find, right? Like function, stuff like that. Makes it a little simpler for you. Anyways, that's a side note. So you should have the data.json file open. And we're going to talk about JSON and APIs, part 1. The first part is JSON versus XML. So below are two very common data structures. If you see here, I'm just going to make this a little bigger so you can actually see what we're doing here. I'll zoom in a bit. These two things, right? Make it even bigger. There we go. How many people are familiar with those two data structures? Yep. How many people have worked with XML out of curiosity? So incidentally, every one of you should put your hand up because you've all worked with XML. You just may not have realized it. So HTML is XML based. So if you've touched HTML, you've done XML. That's just the way it is. JSON, how many of you are familiar or use JSON and worked with JSON? A couple of you? Yep. JSON's pretty good. It's definitely lower byte size than what XML is, which makes it beneficial for transferring it around the web. It's faster, it's a little cleaner. It also is handled natively by the browser a lot better because it maintains its actual JSON structure. We'll see that today actually when we go to retrieve it from an API and we pull it into our system. It actually remains this wonderful object, right? And you'll notice that it seems very familiar. That's because it looks like a JavaScript object, doesn't it? It looks just like the object literals we've created before. And that's because it is, essentially. And that's what the name stands for, JavaScript Object Notation, right? So it's right in the name. It's an object. And we've worked a lot with objects since the beginning of the semester. So the two data blocks, as you can see, are XML and JSON. XML was a common format used to give data meaning through the utilization of tags, just like HTML, right? Especially HTML5, it gives us the semantic value to our content. XML was used to basically describe data. It's still used quite a bit, especially in like legacy systems. Like for example, the Moneris payment system. When you do API calls with Moneris and try to make payments and stuff, the response that you get back from Moneris is in XML because it was built like 20 years ago, and they're not going to update it because it costs probably billions of dollars to make any infrastructure changes in that company because it's so huge. But most leaner startups and newer companies and companies that have refactored in the last 10 years have switched over to JSON due to its speed and the fact that it's natively compatible with JavaScript. A lot of the companies that are out there right now are moving over to JavaScript frameworks, using Mongo because it's JavaScript, using Node on the back end because it's JavaScript, and then all communication data is being traveled through APIs using JSON because it's JavaScript. So everywhere I'm going is all JavaScript, which is awesome because everything kind of communicates natively back and forth. Whereas, systems like our G-Shift system, for example, the back end is Ruby, our front end is turning into React. We have Go on some boxes, we have Dynamo databases, we have Mongo, we have Postgres. We have like a whole mesh of different things that we work with, and that's our goal, is to move eventually to an entire JavaScript-based system. JavaScript gives us a lot of benefits. One, it scales beautifully because it's cheap to scale because it's single-threaded and it's asynchronous. It's very cheap to scale versus things like Ruby or PHP or any of those, which you just literally are throwing money at resources, trying to pump resources up to deal with, more connections or more information or more components that you need to provide. So JSON is very, very important to understand. It's clean. It's a fast data language. It describes basically, just like the XML does, a data object. It gives us key value pairs that basically describe, I can't think of a better word, just describes what each of this data is, right? So SKU would be the SKU of the item, name would be whatever name it is, weight, dimensions is an object that contains height, width, and length, and then there's a float for the price. It's pretty easy to read, right? Even if you knew nothing about data objects, you could look at that and kind of guess what's going on, like pretty quickly. So working with JSON supports a few data types as storage. You get strings, you get integers, floats, arrays, and objects, right? And that seems familiar because it's like literal objects. However, JSON does not support functions. You can't submit functions back and forth through your API. Normally, you wouldn't anyways, because if you were going to call a function, you would call the function's API path instead. So you don't generally send functions through it anyways, but it does support 5 major data types. So we're going to actually create a JSON block. And we're going to start by creating an object. So there's 2 major operators that are used in JSON. One is this, and the other is I call them the Alfred Hitchcock brackets. It looks like Alfred Hitchcock. I'm sure you can guess what these things are. What do you think this represents? Yeah, it represents an array. And what do you think that represents? An object. There you go. Alex knows JSON. That was pretty much everything right in those 2 objects. So let's create some. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see what we're doing here. We're going to create an object instead of an array. But you can start with an array, or you can start with an object. It's totally up to you. Arrays are for lists, right? It's a list of items. That's what we usually put in an array. An object is more like a description of something. So we're going to use an object, and we're going to describe a business called Bob's Bait and Tackle Shop. You can call it whatever you want. If you want to be creative and make up your own business name, you go right for it. So we start off with the object notation. Zoom in a little bit more. Maybe a little bit more. There we go. There we go. So that tells JSON that we have an object and that we're going to work with an object. And objects are always made up of a list of 2 things, right? Every single thing inside the object has 2 components, I would say. It always has a and that always has a b. Does anybody want to try to fill in those two non-English words? So our list would be, always starts with a key, yeah? So we always have a key. And the key always has a value, right? And that's true for everything in our object, whether the value is an array, an object, a string, a float, or an integer. It always has a value. You always have a key, and you always have a value. There's one very important concept to understand about the keys. Does anyone want to take a guess at what's an important rule about those keys? It's very important. Yes. Yes, they have to be unique. Because if I have two keys with the same name, that's a collision, right? Just like if you were to have two variables with the same name, that's a collision. You can't do that because it doesn't know. The computer does not know which one you're talking about. It can't read your brain. It's not your mom, right? It has no idea what's going on. So you want to make sure that your keys are always unique, okay? One thing when we create our JSON structure, if you're using like Node and things like that, you can create JSON. You can create like JSON structures using like keys without quotes, so that they're not strings. But if we're creating a raw JSON structure like this, we have to use quotes. So our keys will have quotes around them, and our values will have quotes around them if they're a string. So we're going to create the following properties. We're going to create a company name property, and then give it a name. I'm going to call mine Bob's Bait and Tackle Shop. Turn this off. Anytime our application at work goes into error or has problems, we get like engine notifications that basically say, hey, shit's going sideways, you need to fix this. That's what I thought was happening, but it's not. It's our developer chat, and they're just posting Giphy after Giphy after Giphy. It's a bit annoying. All right, so I'm going to also add a street address. See how if I try to type it without quotes, see how it goes red like that? That's my IDE saying, hey, dude, this is not valid JSON. Address 1. And I'm going to say 456 Flounders Lane. And then I'm going to give it a street address 2 as well. There is a method to all this, by the way. We will be using this data. And I'm going to say it's unit number 24. I'm going to create a city. I'll just make it Waterloo. There's a theme here, in case you haven't seen it, noticed it. Province, well, that's in Ontario.
That doesn't follow the theme.
What's that?
That doesn't follow the theme.
We don't have a water-based province. Like, at least not a water-based named province. What's that?
I have none of it.
Oh, none of it. You're funny. That was corny. All right. I'm going to create established. And this is where it changes a little bit. So far, we've created strings, right? We have 6 strings. Yeah, what's wrong with strings? Strings are fantastic. But we can also use integers. So I can make established 1965. I can also use booleans as well. So I can say active and make it equal to true. That is valid. And then last but not least, I'm going to give it a slogan. There we go. So it supports, as you can see, basic data types. It supports strings, supports integers, and it supports booleans. Incidentally, it also supports, I'm doing this kind of out of order if you're looking at the thing. No, I can't do it out of order. It also supports arrays and objects as well. So why don't we add an array to this? We'll call it featured products. And we'll make its value an array. Like so. And this array is just going to have some numbers in it. So I'm just going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. First one. This one will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8. I'm making them unique. In case you're kind of curious what I'm doing here, it makes sense, right? You guys have done relational databases at this point. So I'm sure you can kind of guess what I'm doing here. These are basically unique identifiers for our featured products. I don't want to copy my product and put it into this JSON structure there. I'd rather just create a reference to where my product is, right? That makes more sense. So like I said, not only can we support nested arrays inside of our as a value, we can actually keep nesting. We can nest infinitely until we run out of memory. Like, we can go as far as we want to go. So I'm going to create another property called products. Make sure you're putting these commas in, because that's what tells the JSON structure that this is a value, this is a key value, this is a key value, and it keeps separating it via the commas. Right? I'm going to create products. Products will be an array. Oops, that's not an array. An array. But it's going to be an array of objects. Ooh. So I'll put an object inside my products array. Now we're going to create one product in here, and then we're going to validate our JSON to make sure that we know that we're working with valid JSON and we haven't made any mistakes. You wouldn't want to type out all this JSON and then find out there's an error, right? Generally, you won't be typing out your own JSON. You might if you're building like a configuration file, but generally your JSON is going to be built for you either by retrieving it from Mongo or retrieving it from like a SQL database and then converting it to JSON. So it's very rare that you'll be creating your own. Anyway, so let's create a product. First, I'm going to give it a SKU. And I'm going to make the SKU equal to one of these featured product numbers. So I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whoops, 4, 5, 6. Give it a name. I'm going to say worms. And yes, if you're a fisherman or fisherwoman or fisher person, I'm going to totally screw up this pricing. I'm going to say weight 1. That's kilos, by the way. Yeah, but I don't want to write kilos beside it because I want to maintain some normalization. Dimensions. Look at this. We support nesting at multitudes of levels. Another object. We can actually nest an object inside there. Oh my. All right, so height. My ID is really nice. It actually like color codes it based on the levels, which is pretty cool. I like how it does that. Hopefully your ID does that too. Height is 10. That'll be in centimeters. Width will be 10. And the length will be 20. I mean, if we really wanted to normalize this, we'd probably create a package and then give the package an ID and then just assign the ID. And the package would contain the dimensions if we wanted to make it really atomic. And then I'm going to put a comma after that object, and I'm going to enter in the price. And this is where we get to our last data type, which would be a float at 2.35. So that creates our first little block of data. We are going to add 4 more products to this, but before we do that, I'd like to validate this and make sure this is actually valid JSON. So I don't have any specific website I go to do this. I just literally go to Google, online, JSON validator. You can even see I've typed it recently. There we go. I just choose either like the top link or whatever. This one's called lint. I'm going to paste my JSON in there. Make sure it's all in there. And then I'm going to click the validate JSON button. And if I get a green valid JSON, then I know everything's good, right? If I want to make a mistake, I'm just going to take one of the commas out and click validate JSON, and there you go. I get a big error saying, no, you've got a problem, but it at least tells you what line it's on. It kind of gives you, it doesn't really tell you what it's expecting an end of file. So it's expecting one of these things in order to fix it. Yes, Alex?
Is W3 unable to validate JSON?
I don't know if W3 does JSON validation anymore. W3C JSON validator. No. I don't think so. No, not that. I think it does XML though. I think you can do XML validation with it.
It does HTML.
Yeah. But it doesn't do JSON validation. So no, you'll have to use like a JSON lint. I have one that's, I think I have one that's built into my IDE. But I can't remember. I can't remember what it's called. JSON. Yeah, I don't know where it is. I mean, it must be there because if I do something without quotes, it just highlights it red and tells me it's a mistake. So this is Sublime that I'm working with. Yeah. But you're saying it's native. It's native to Sublime. All right, so I'm going to duplicate this products object. So I'm going to literally grab from this curly brace to this curly brace, copy it, and paste it underneath. That way I don't have to write all of that out again. And this time I'm going to add the new stuff. So I'm going to change the number to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. Change the name to minnows. The dimensions are the same, only the price is different. And I said it's $3.75. Which is likely untrue, like for a kilo of minnows.
Sorry, what are you doing?
I changed the SKU to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. I changed the name to minnows. And I changed the price to $3.75. No, not doing anything.
That's the array.
What's the array?
It's an array of objects.
Yes, it's an array of product objects. That is correct. All right, I'm ready to add another product in. These aren't so bad when we're just copying and pasting them. I'm going to change this one to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8. I'm sure you can see the theme here. Make this leeches. Everything basically stays the same except for the price is going to change to $4.65. I have 2 more to add, and then we will be done this particular thing.
So is this two-dimensional array or?
This would be, let's see, how many dimensions are we in here? We're in one object, in one array. We're at 1 dimension, actually, in the array.
So how does it understand that that price
Because
belongs to that?
it's in the object.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not a 2-dimensional array, it's objects nested into the array as actual list items. Yeah. So each object becomes a list item. You can do multi-dimensional array, though. It supports that. It's actually pretty cool. I really would like JSON. All right, I'm going to duplicate this again. This time, we're going to do something a little bit more fantastical. We'll create Blue Whale, because you can totally buy Blue Whale as a bait. They're only 140,000 kilos.
Oh, what are you actually fishing for? That's the
If you're fishing with a blue whale,
fish for 50 blue.
you'll see. Yeah. What did you say, Alex?
Kraken.
Did you already read the sheet?
No.
Kraken.
Oh.
Yeah, you're likely fishing for Kraken. You can fish for colossal squid. Colossal squid like to attack blue whales. They've found like scratch marks all down the sides from big squids. And I'm going to say it's about 123,000 on the black market. 65 cents. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. I'm going to create another one. I'm going to call it, I'm going to skip one of these. I'm just going to make the Kraken this time. Kraken. And obviously this is all made up. $675,000. Because they're hard to find. 600 centimeters in height. 800 centimeters in width. And 8,000 centimeters in length. And that would be the Kraken. I need to change this from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What was our last one? I need to change both of those, actually. Change this one to 9. Make sure all the numbers are unique, even if you just spam the number key. I'm going to make this one 60. There we go. I think 5 products will work. This is 3 featured and then 5 products to list. So there's all of our products in there. Now, we have an array of products, and I want to add some on sale items and say that these products are on sale. And you'll notice that our JSON file here is getting kind of long and it's kind of difficult to read, right? So what I can do is my IDE supports collapsing. So I can come up here to where the products are, and in the left line number area, I'll get this little arrow and I can click it and it collapses it down. So now I can see it a little better, right? So I'm going to add a comma after my products. I'm going to create a new key called on sale, and it's going to be equal to an array. And that array is going to have a list of objects as well. I'm going to use skew to create the reference point, and I'm just going to choose one of these ones. I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. And then I'm going to create one more key called discount %, and that will be a representation of how much it's on sale for, and I'm going to say 25. And then I'll create another one. Skew 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to say 9 because I know there's a 9 in there. And that will be discount % as well. And I'm going to say it's 75%. So JSON, I don't know. I find it easy. I don't find it very hard to understand. It makes sense. The nesting even kind of makes sense. You know, I work with it a lot, so maybe that's why. But does anybody find it kind of difficult to kind of figure out what it's doing? No? It's pretty straightforward, right? And I would say it's actually even more simpler than working with XML because you actually have data structures representing your objects as well. If you look at XML, like the XML example at the top of the page here, you know, and I zoom in here. No, wrong one. There we go. This XML, you can't tell that something is an object, and you also can't tell if it's like a list or anything, because you kind of have to guess that that's what's happening, right? That this thing is this representation. It's not as straightforward as the JSON, which uses square brackets to represent an array, just like any programming language, right? Or the curly braces to represent an object, like any programming language. To me, it's a lot simpler to look at JSON and understand when something is an object or something is an array than it is in XML. It's just my opinion. All right. Working with remote JSON.
What exactly does SKU stand for?
I don't know. Let me Google that for you. Define SKU. Stock keeping unit. Yeah. I know the SKUs, like the actual SKU number, usually represents something for a company. They usually try to pair off the digits to make it equal something. So like the first 2 digits might be a representation of its color, then its attribute, and then it might be more attributes, and then its actual product, and then something else. Like they usually use the numbers to represent something, but yeah. Or we're using it basically as a unique identifier, just like an ID in a database table. That's basically how we're treating it. So we're going to work with remote JSON, but before we do that, there's an issue we have to discuss. And this is confusing, and I don't expect you to 100% know this. I do expect you to be aware of it, though, because it's something that you will likely encounter, especially when you're on co-op, and that's CORS, right? Is anybody familiar with CORS or encountered CORS before? No? CORS is cross-origin resource sharing. Basically, this is an implementation of more recent browsers. It's like a security piece in place to stop, you know, a server from delivering unsupported content to a website, even by accident. Basically, the idea is if I am accessing content from, Sean.com and I want to access content that's on GoCool.com, I can't. I'm not allowed because of this particular policy. Because GoCool's images are not SeanMcKinnon.ca domain, I'm not allowed to access them. Now, it's not usually images that are an issue. APIs are, though. So if I try to access a data.json file from another site, I wind up with an issue. And I can show you this. We'll open up our wonderful console. Actually, maybe I have this from Tuesday. That would be really handy if I did. Yes, I do. Cool. I know that works. So this is a Matt Bass insult generator. And if I go directly to Matt Bass's site, so I'm just going to copy this URL. I'm going to open up a new tab and go directly to Matt's site. Hit enter, and it generates immediately an insult for me. Okay? And if I refresh, I get a new one every time. I love this thing. If you take my advanced JavaScript class, we will be using this API a lot. So anyways, because it's funny, and I think it's awesome. But if I try to fetch it inside here, so fetch is a part of the ES6 JavaScript API, and it basically will do GET requests. You can think of it like curl, right? If I try to fetch that same address and bring it back, Google, the browser, is going to be like, whoa, dude, you want this resource from this server that is not your domain, and you want to access it. No, sorry, I'm not going to let you do that. Even though it should be my choice, not theirs. So if I hit enter on this, I get this wonderful error. Access to fetch at this address from origin has been blocked by CORS policy. No access control allow origin header is present on the requested resource. The only way around this is for Matt to deliver the appropriate headers authorizing, in our scenario, localhost to access this. That is the only way. Or to just literally make it open to anybody. Basically allow everybody, and for us to be okay with that. As long as both parties are okay with that, we can receive the resource and everything works hunky-dory. Now you may be like, that seems like a lot to remember. For the most part, you won't be doing a lot of API fetching from the front. You will if you work in systems that are split up, right? So like, for example, our G-Shift system, it's kind of interesting. We have an app, right? The app is the front-facing thing where our clients go through. App extends to engine. Engine contains usually the data pieces where we can connect to other points of our application. Engine connects to real-time. Real-time basically delivers data automatically. Engine also connects to Shorty, which is our short URL server. In addition, short URL connects to Dynamo, which is our database. App connects to Postgres. Engine connects to Worker. Worker connects to Mongo. And Worker also connects to Postgres. That's G-Shift's app. Oh, by the way, there's multiples of these. Like, there's 3 app boxes, there's 13 workers, there's like 4 or 5 engines. Like, we have multiples of these running at all time. Because of this, not everything is at the same domain at all. So we do have to take CORS into effect because some of our stuff does use client-side fetch API in order for us to go and grab content and bring it back. So our way around CORS is by using something called a proxy. So we proxy through and grab the data that way. Why do you need to be aware of this? Is because if you're going on co-op and you're working in systems like that, which is not, it's not unlikely that you wouldn't be, you need to be aware that CORS could bluntly fuck up your life for a little bit. You should be aware that it exists and then kind of figure out a way to work around it. Incidentally, it's going to screw us up today because we are trying to access the JSON data locally. Localhost is our domain. That is not Netlify's website, so we can't access it based on that. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a Netlify account. We're going to put our data.json file up there. And to deal with CORS, we're going to create a header file that basically says Free reign. Anybody can access this file. Okay? So let's go through that. It's 4:42. Do you want to take a minimal break, and then we'll do it when you get back after the break? Yeah? All right, so let's do that. Let's take a 15-minute break. This will be your lab today. Okay, so we're going to add a new tool to your belt today called Netlify. You'll like it. It's cool because you can actually put websites up. If you wanted to, you could even do like a portfolio site on it. It's entirely free, doesn't require a credit card, and the thing that makes it better than something like, say, Heroku is it's not, like Heroku uses sleeping droplets. Basically what that means is after 30 minutes of inactivity, the droplet goes down. And then, so the next time somebody goes to your site, it takes like 30 seconds for it to boot back up, right? If you're trying to get a job and somebody goes to your portfolio site and it takes 30 seconds for your portfolio site to boot up, that's not very good in first impression, right? Anyways, Netlify, there's a downfall and yet not. So the downfall of Netlify is that it's entirely client-side. So HTML, JavaScript, and CSS only. No Node, though. Like, no server-side whatsoever. So no Node, no Ruby, no PHP, nothing on the server. There's a way that you can still do things on the server, though. That's through something called AWS Lambdas, right? So if you're not familiar with Lambdas, don't worry about it. It's not nothing I'm going to quiz you on. But if you want to do some extra cool stuff, then Lambdas is kind of where it's at. It's also where the industry is kind of going. A lot of people are looking at AI. Like, just understanding AWS services in general would be very beneficial for you, okay? Even, like, you guys get like a free $100 ticket or something for AWS? Yeah, I'd use it. Go set up an EC2, which is like a box, right? Deploy something onto it. Set up S3. Get comfortable with writing things to S3 and taking things from S3. Think of S3 like Dropbox, okay? EC2 is more like a computer, a virtual computer in the cloud. That's EC2, right? Set up a database, because you can set up Postgres, you can set up MySQL, any type of database you can want. Mongo, DynamoDB, whatever you want. And learn how to work with Amazon stuff. That way you can write on your resume, I know AWS. Okay? And it's not hard. Like, once you get to it, they have lots of tutorials. It's very simple to use. It's not complex. They deal with most of the complex stuff for you anyways, but having that on your resume would be very, very cool. Even if you have no intentions of doing web stuff, knowing AWS is beneficial to you. Trust me. All right. So we're going to take a look at Netlify, but before we set up a Netlify account, I want to do some GitHub type stuff. So if you can navigate to your GitHub, I'm going to navigate to mine. And if you're already signed in, it should start you at this kind of page here. It should. If it doesn't sign in, I think I'm using the new beta version of their desktop kind of thing, or not their desktop, their dashboard. So mine might look a little different than yours. But as long as you know where your repositories are, that's totally cool. And as long as you know how to create a new repository, that's even better. Does anybody here not know how to create a new repository? No? Okay. We're going to take this one step further. Don't click new repository yet. We're going to take this one step further. What I would like you to do is you want GitHub Desktop. And then it should be the first link. It should be desktop.github.com. It's this wonderful tool here. Full disclosure, I've been coding for quite a while. I've used Git for quite a while. And I know about this much of Git terminal because I hate it. I hate it because I like to visually see my commits. I like to visually see my files. And I don't want to try to go through Git status and go find my stuff. I find it annoying. So I use an IDE, okay? Hardcore senior developers, they don't use IDEs, right? They use the terminal. They open up the big black box and they just do everything through the black box, right? But I don't see any problem with this. And when you guys are starting out with Git, I think this is a cool thing to use because it gives you a lot more control and power over Git, right? And it's all interactive, so it's very easy. It's for Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. So unless you're absolutely against it, click download for whatever OS you're working with. It's a small file. It should only take a little bit. You should probably just write that down, go cool. And then when you get internet, you can go to it. Oh, you already have it? Yeah. If you have it, go ahead and open it up. That's interesting. Why is this opened like that? There we go. All right. And I'll put myself where you guys will be. You will likely be at... So I don't generally use this one. I need to get to... Right. All right, so you'll be at a page where it will ask you to do something like either add, create, or something like that. You can choose to create a new repository. If you click the create new repository, you should see the same stuff that I'm seeing now, this little modal here. What's interesting about this is going to create a new repository locally on your computer. Okay, so this is not in GitHub yet, but it will connect to your GitHub. So that will be one of the first things that will happen. When you load it up, it's going to ask you to authorize GitHub. You're going to go through, connect your GitHub account to it, and now you are connected between your computer and GitHub, so you can add repositories here and push them to here. Okay, very simple. No more ID or no more console. You don't need to do that at the command line or anything like that. You do it all through the application. Okay. Is anybody still waiting for their download?
I'm just trying to run the installer.
Yeah, just run the installer. You said trying. Is it breaking?
No, it wasn't launching the installer.
Oh, okay. Is it launching now?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, just let me know when you're at this screen, Alex. You'll have to add your GitHub to it. I don't want to get too far ahead of everybody because if I do, then you'll get way behind. For those of you that don't necessarily want to use this tool, you can do everything we're going to do in the command line. It's just a little trickier. Yeah. I don't know what to suggest. That's the same thing. Why are you creating why are you not? Try to shut your Wi-Fi off and then turn it back on again. See if that fixes it. If it doesn't, fire emails off to Red, whatever it is. Or to Ross. Just bombard Ross with emails. My internet's not working. From your phone, obviously, because you can't connect. It'd be a good use for AWS. Set up an EC2, have it do an autoresponder, and just have it fire emails every 2 minutes off to Ross. Internet's not working, Ross. Internet's not working. All right. Are we there, Alex?
Yeah.
Like you're at this screen?
I set it up.
Okay. Let me know when you're at this screen. Oh, you're going through? You've already done this?
I've already done.
Okay, forget it. He's on beyond us. Okay, create a name for a repository. You can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call mine Week 12 API. So I'm going to say Week 12 API. The repository name has to be, I think it has to be lowercase letters, and I think it also, or maybe it doesn't have to be lowercase letters. I can't remember. There's a bunch of rules about the repository name, though. I think there's no dashes. You can use underscores, stuff like that, but it has to, like, it's specific. You can't use spaces.
You can use dash.
You can use dash? Yeah, but you can't use spaces then. Yeah, has to be a solid word. I think it abides by almost like the same aspects as like variable naming. But you can probably start with a number. I don't know. Anyways, not important. Description, you can give it a description if you want. Under the local path, though, local path is where you locally want to put your repository. Now, when it does this, you want to give it a directory name at this particular point. It's going to put that into the directory, right? So if you just like point it at documents, for example, and say open, it will create a folder in there called Week 12 API. So you don't need to create a folder and then put it in the folder. Otherwise, now you got to go down 2 levels to get to your actual thing. So I'll do it to my desktop, and I'll show you what I mean. If I just click open, so now it's going to use my desktop as my local path. You can initialize with a README, but you don't have to. Totally up to you.
Isn't it best practice to
The only reason why you initialize with a README is so you have a file in there, because when you do a push, you cannot push an empty repository. It won't allow it. You have to have something in the repository. It makes sense, right? Like, why would you push air up? There's no value to air. So you have to push something up. So if you're not going to use a README, you want to at least make sure there's a file in there. But yeah, we can initialize with a README. We will. Though my markup skills are terrible. I have no markup skills. Not very good at writing up markup. All right, you can do a git ignore if you want to. We don't need to, though. License is generally MIT. Whoa, what the heck happened there? Clicking things. That's what happened.
If we did a git ignore for JavaScript, what would it be?
Would it be, if you did the git ignore for JavaScript,
As I scroll, because it has a bunch of languages as options to choose from.
I think that's literally what you want to ignore. So if you choose JavaScript, it will ignore all .js extended files, which would be very counterintuitive. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to click Create Repository. There we go. There's my repository. It tells me the current branch I'm on. I'm on master. And if I want to make my repository available on GitHub, so if I show you my GitHub right now and I click refresh, you will notice the repository is not in my repositories list yet. The reason is because currently it is only local. It is not remote yet. If I want to make it remote, I have to click Publish Repository. It's going to ask me where I want to put it. I'm saying GitHub. If you have a private GitHub account, you can keep the check mark, keep this code private. If you don't, you have to uncheck that. Okay? I don't, because I'm not paying for it. So I uncheck it. If I want private repositories, I use Bitbucket. If I want public repositories, I use GitHub, because both are free. And then I just click Publish Repository. And it thinks about it. Does stuff. Pushes it up. Now if I click refresh, there it is. GCS McKinnon, week 12 API. And you can see people who have shared things with me, like GoCool and Abhishek. I always wonder why you guys always invite me to your projects, and then I found out that you guys all have private. Every one of you has a private
It's
GitHub. It makes sense because it stops people from stealing your stuff, right?
Jared makes us have it private and sends me a link.
Yeah. It makes sense. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. All right, so now you're ready to work with this thing. So I can go to my desktop because that's where it's at. So I'm going to open up Finder. If you're in Windows, you would open up Explorer. I'm going to navigate to my desktop. It's hard to read the little tags, but this is my week 12 API folder right here on my desktop. Sorry, I didn't hear that. Was that directed at me? No. All right. Was it sarcasm about me putting it on my desktop?
What?
Were you making fun of me for putting it on my desktop?
Yeah, because if you're putting it on your desktop, you want to find it easily, right? You don't want.
I figured like your desktop is like the easiest place to find anything. That's where every baby boomer puts everything. That's why when you go to your grandma's house, all of her files are on her desktop. There's like 7,000 files, and they're all on the desktop.
It makes it actually hard to find things on the desktop.
Yeah, but did you see my desktop?
Well, I don't.
Oh, there we go.
I don't put straight files. I put folders.
Right. When we're done this, I'm deleting the repository and deleting the folder. I don't like stuff on my desktop. I know how to use Finder. I don't need stuff on my desktop. Anyways, I'm doing it for ease of use. Stop making fun of me, Alex. All right. So now I'm going to the JSON file that we created over here. I want to put it in this week 12 directory. So obviously I'm going to need a second Finder window. So I'm going to just choose to create a new Finder window. I'm going to put it on the left side. So if you're in Windows, you want to Explorer windows. Navigate to where I have that JSON file. So mine's under the starter.json directory. And I believe it's up a bit. That's main, fetch, Data, there it is, right here. Okay? If you're in Mac, if you drag this from here to here, it will move it, not copy it. Okay? If you're in Windows, I think it copies it. It's always by copy. Whereas in Mac, it just pulls it. If you don't want to lose the original file, what you do is hold down the Alt key on your keyboard and then drag it. And you'll notice you get a little plus sign and then drop it, and it will copy it over. Another option is to just click on it, Command-C, go to the other directory, Command-B. So now I have my data.json file in there.
In the repository.
What's that? Inside the repository directory, yes. Okay, and then we have one more step. We have to create a header file in here for Netlify. Netlify will use the header file in order to basically set our allow origin permissions to wildcard. Wildcard is the star. And basically that means anybody trying to connect won't have an issue. They won't get the course policy issue. But we need to be able to do that. So we're going to create a file. We're not going to create it in here. We're literally going to open up this week 12 directory as a new project inside our Sublime. So I'm just going to go open, or whatever IDE you're using. Navigate to my desktop. Choose week 12 API and click open. Okay. And there's all the things that I currently have inside my IDE. My IDE even shows my Git attributes and any invisible files. That's the cool thing about Sublime and other IDEs. You should be able to see hidden files in them, like gitignore, like htaccess files, webconfig files. Anything that's basically an invisible file should be visible inside your IDE. Otherwise, it's useless. Right-click on your root folder, the week 12 folder, and you're going to create a new file, and you're literally going to call it underscore header with no file extension. Okay, that's very important. There's no file extension on this. This is known as a proc file. Proc files, basically their purpose, I think it stands for process file. Basically their purpose is they tell the virtual machine, the virtual box, how to set itself up. Okay, so it gives information to the virtual machine. In Ruby, they're actually called proc files, and when you set them up for like Heroku or AWS, they actually they set up things like the number of workers that need to be running and stuff like that. They're very important. It's just your way of telling your remote box how to do things. So anyways, I'm going to create this header file. And then we're going to set up the information on it, which I don't know if I've got. Right, it's not in this directory. I need to know what the things are because I can never remember. There it is. So the first thing is we're going to scope it to just the file we're working with. Because our file is at the root of the week 12 API repository, we can literally start at the root, and then we only want to scope it to the data.json file. So we're going to say data.json is all we're going to do. That basically tells the header file at data.json, I now want you to add these headers for any requests coming into data.json. So this will only work for data.json. If you add another API, you have to come in here and do the same thing again, okay, for the next one. Then you tab in, okay. I don't know if it's actually tab delimited or if it just reads to the next setting. I think it might actually pick it up this way. This is the way they tell you to do it on their website. The header we're affecting is called access, control, allow, origin with a capital O, and followed by a colon. And then we can use the wildcard, which is just an asterisk. And that's it. You can set more headers if you ever wanted to. You could have the content header in there. You could have, like, I don't know, maybe you want to tell people it's not JSON, it's an image or whatever. So you can override the content type header. You could override the origin. You could override. There's tons. There's like, I don't know. There's like so many headers. It's not even funny. All right. Is anybody catching up? No? Yes, Alex.
Kind of lost me.
At the what part?
So we moved the data.json
Yeah,
to our repository.
correct.
We copied that over.
Yes.
Okay. And this is doing what exactly?
This sets the headers inside our virtual box on Netlify. It tells the headers to set the access control allow origin to anyone, which is the start.
But
So
we haven't got Netlify yet.
no, we haven't,
Okay.
but we're going to need this file. We're going to push all of this to GitHub is what's going to happen, but we're going to do this in 3 steps.
Alright.
So we've done this part now. Next thing we want to do is actually set up our Netlify account. And I'm going to do this kind of a bit out of order. Instead of pushing this to the repository and then setting up our Netlify account, I want to show you how it actually is affected. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up our Netlify account. Once it's set up, then we'll push this, okay? So open up your wonderful web browser, whatever you're using. Navigate to this pretty website here called Netlify, and that is netlify.com. Okay. Netlify. Everything we're doing is free, so don't worry. There's no credit cards or anything like that. You're not going to get charged for anything. Doesn't work like that. No negative billing or anything. Go ahead and sign up. Follow through the sign up process to create a new account. You can even just click the GitHub sign up and sign up using your GitHub. Okay? I'm going to log in. Once you're done, you should hit this page. All right, so I'll give you like 5 minutes to get to there. Doesn't take too long. Is anybody already there? Yeah, a few of you. Okay. Are we close? Still waiting for internet? You got internet. Nice. Did you email Ross? You didn't email Ross? No. That's all right. Incidentally, I didn't notice this. I think this might be new. Like 2 days ago, kind of new. You can actually drag and drop your whole site folder there and not deploy from GitHub. So if you don't want to put it onto GitHub, you just want to like load up a dummy site for whatever reason, you can just drop it right there, and it will be available to you. It's kind of neat. It'll be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then if you want any functionality like lambdas or anything like that, like that underscore headers file, you have to create things like that. Actually, create a directory called underscore functions, and then you put all your AWS Lambda paths in there. Have you used AWS Lambda?
I learned about it.
Did you?
It's like serverless architecture.
Exactly, serverless architecture. We want to move some of our systems, some of our workers, our more like numpty workers, over to AWS Lambdas because it's so much cheaper to run.
It charges only for calls.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what's interesting, we have a worker that actually runs, it grinds our search engine result pages, and we have 13 of them, right? And they take the SERP results and they grind them up and they put them in, and it takes about, I don't know, I want to say it takes at least 20 to 30 minutes, and that's constant. It's doing it all day long. With AWS, it literally produces like 6,000 machines at once, grinds them all, and then done, gone. And then every time we get new SERP result sets, 6,000 machines, and then done again. So we really want to do it because it's going to speed our system up huge and reduce our cost drastically. That's pretty neat. All right, so you should have, hopefully by this point, this page. Is anybody not at this page? No? Okay. Cool. So you're going to click New Site from Git. And we want continuous deployment. So what is continuous deployment? Continuous deployment means that you never have to go here and FTP files. You never have to go here and click a deploy button. You never have to go here and do anything. All you ever have to do is push your files to the linked GitHub account. As soon as you push those files, it will fire off a hook, and this thing will immediately get the file updates. It's usually pretty quick. It's within like about 5 seconds or so, and it'll be updated and ready to go. So we're going to connect GitHub. So click on GitHub, unless you're using GitLab or Bitbucket. You'll have your first setup, so it will ask you to authorize GitHub. There's a spot in there that says selected repositories. Do not click that. Make sure it says all repositories. Otherwise, you'll only ever get the one repository. Once you're done that, you're going to select the repository you're working with. So I'm going to click Week 12 API. Okay. Static site builders, in case you're curious, or like Jekyll. It's like the only one I know of that's worth knowing, I guess, is Jekyll. There's Jekyll, there's a few others, I guess. But we're not doing any of that. We don't need a published directory because we're not moving to a specific directory. Though that is cool because you can actually link your project up to multiple directories within one domain, and then they will push individually into those directories, which is kind of neat. Under advanced, you can create like environment variables and then access those environment variables, but we don't need to do that. All we need to do when we're ready is click deploy site, and we only ever do it this one time, and then after that point, that's it. It will always read from GitHub.
Could you push your code to the event?
Nope, we don't need to.
That's saying that.
Is it saying there's nothing there? No, it's saying site deploy in progress. You should have published the repository, though. You did? Yeah. You should get not found. Are you getting a not found?
I'm getting the access to the repository. This could be because the repository is empty.
Oh, did you not create a README file in it? You need some file, any file, it doesn't really matter what. If you want, you can push your folder up. Yeah, if you're getting an issue where it can't actually create the site because the repository is not available, repositories can't be empty. They actually have to have something in them. That's why most people usually create them with a README file. So you need to actually go and create a file and put it in it, and then follow this next step that we're going to do. So the next step, we're going to open up our GitHub Desktop. And if you click inside, you're going to notice you have 2 changed files. Changed files mean that these are the files that have actually had revisions or refactoring done in them. What's really neat is when you click on them, because it's an IDE, you can physically see the change over to the right-hand side. So you know exactly what was changed inside your file. Okay? To commit these, you select them, and then you write your commit message down here. But I want to show you something. There's 4 steps that you do when you generally do Git. Don't push these yet, by the way. Just hold on for 1 second because I want to show you this. All right. There's 4 steps, technically 5, but there's 4 generally. There's staging. Okay. How many of you have heard of staging? 1. That's what I thought. Okay, 2. Yeah. Then there's pulling. Sorry, I'm a step out. Staging. Committing. Is there 2 T's in committing? There is now. Committing. Pulling. And pushing. Every time you do this, those are the steps, okay? Here's the thing. If you're pushing and you add this, what does that do? Forces. If you are doing this, pretend F doesn't mean force, pretend F means fuck up. you are adding -f, you are doing something wrong. Because what -f will do is it says, I don't care what is in the repository currently, your stuff's going up. Which means it will just wipe anything else inside the repository. If you do -f, you'll get your face punched in by a senior developer, I can guarantee you. Don't ever do -f because it's so much of a pain in the butt to roll this stuff back and fix things. So -f should never be your go-to. There's only specific times that you do -f. Usually if you're doing something like called rebasing or something like that, which you probably won't be doing right off the bat in your careers. So here's what staging means. Staging means it's the files you're preparing to commit. Okay? So I have two files here. Generally, when I'm creating my staging, I like to make sure I add commit messages that are specific to what I've done, right? Header and data, they don't correlate. The process, the task that I was completing is not the same for those two files, right? Data was my data structure that I created. Header was so that I could deal with the headers. I'm not going to put those under one commit message because the commit message is not applicable to the two of them, right? They are separate. They should have separate commit messages. So to stage them, I click the little checkbox. That is now staged. Underneath here, where it says create the header, down here, I add a summary. So I'm going to say created header for Netlify. Okay. When I'm done that, I'm going to click the little button down at the bottom that says commit to master. So now I'm on step 2, committing. Okay. Now I'm ready to do the next one. I'm going to click data.json, the checkbox beside it. I'm going to write adding data for Bob's bait and tackle shop. There is like a character limit that actually shows up in the commit messages. You can add a description as well, right? I'm going to write cool shit. There we go. Oh, you can add co-authors to it as well, which I didn't know. Now I'm done that one, I'm going to commit it. Right? This isn't necessarily like a technical thing. This is more of a thought pattern that you should get in the habit of, that when you're committing files, you're not just bulk committing, because those commit messages can come in really handy 6 months down the road when you're trying to remember when things happened and you want to search back through your commits to find out when you added the data for Bob's Bait and Tackle Shop, right? If I just wrote down headers and then committed both files, they're now under the same commit message, and I'm not going to be able to get back when that was originally initialized directly. I'm going to have to go searching for it. Yes, Alex?
So the header isn't in the commit yet?
It's in the commit.
Okay.
They're now both in the commit. So now both of these files are waiting to be waiting to be pushed to master. There is a step we always do. Always, always, always get in the habit so it is muscle memory. There is a step you always do before you push. What is that step? Pull. Always pull. Why do we pull?
Someone may have pushed their work, so we take those changes and then push ours.
That's exactly it. Somebody may have pushed changes already on the same branch we're on, so we want to make sure that we get those changes down, because when we go to push, what's going to happen, it's going to take their changes, it's going to take our changes, it's going to make a snowball, and hopefully come out at the other end as your workable, usable code. If not, we will get back, what do we get back? We get a merge conflict. And that kind of goes in here, which will be your step. Actually, it's not even 5. I don't even know why I erased that. 3.5, which is resolve conflicts. Okay? Resolving conflicts doesn't mean add -f. That is not how we resolve conflicts. We resolve conflicts by going and looking at the code and seeing why we have a conflict and then correcting it. That's how we resolve conflicts. Don't do this. Okay? All right, so first thing we're going to do is pull. So there's not like an obvious place to pull. It's under the repository. menu. I don't know where it's in the Windows. It's probably under the same folder or the same menu option. And then you're going to click pull. Now, obviously, we're the only ones pushing, so there are no changes. So why are we doing it? To get into the habit of doing it, right? And now I'm ready to push. I can click the big push button here. It even tells me how many changes I have. There's 2 changes. I'm going to click push. That's going to push up to the repository. And I should have no changes over here. Nothing waiting to push. Now I can go over to my GitHub account. I can refresh. Click on my week 12 API. And you can see my commit messages. Created header for Netlify, adding data for Bob's Bait and Tackle Shop under my commit messages. I have 2 separate commit messages, but both files were pushed at the same time. Right? Now you might be like, well, I'll just bulk push everything. That's fine if it's just you. But if you're working for any company, you want to make sure you have good commit messages. Like in our app, we've had over 15 developers. There's now only 2 of us. And the one guy's only a year old in the app right now. So we're dealing with people's crap, and we have no idea because of bulk commits. Bulk commits. Makes it a lot harder to follow the code back. All right, cool. Incidentally, there's like lots of different things. You can actually click on these files too, and view them right in here. You can also edit them right directly in the repository. Why would I not want to edit directly in the repository? It's not even just that. It's like now my repository is very different than my local, right? But that's also the reason why we pull. Because if I make a change here, I want to make sure that change comes down. If I just push, I'm going to wind up with a merge conflict. Yes?
So is it best to commit one file at a time?
Not necessarily. If they all encompass the same idea, you want to try to generalize the concept, whatever the idea is, right? So say you're rolling out a new feature. Say you're adding like a Facebook API, right, to your website. And you've got 6 files that all encompass this API. You could say Facebook API and then roll all 6 files into the same commit message. That's totally fine because then when I come back and I want to find out when the first commit for the API happened, I can go through time and go find that just by following back through that commit message. But if you're doing like Facebook API, Twitter API, Instagram, LinkedIn all at the same time as your feature, and you're like social API, no, that's not very good. You want to make sure they're separated. That way the commits are easy to see and what files were affected during that commit. Makes it a lot easier to go back through. Especially considering now, like especially for you guys, it's application development. Like web developers are a dime a dozen. You guys don't want to do that because I'm sure you want to make more than $30K a year, right? So you want to do application development. You want to work in large scale systems, and understanding how to commit properly will definitely benefit you, even if you don't ever touch a web application, right? Because people commit C++, people commit C, people commit C#. Everybody commits everything. Actually, writers will commit manuscripts to keep version controls of their manuscripts. So that way they can roll back to a time where, perhaps they changed a subject on a character and they want to roll back to a previous version of that character. They can. All right, so we have our Week 12 API. Now that we've pushed that, our Netlify will reflect that. I'm going to just refresh. You can click the little address up at the top. Mine's called Boring Shannon. It created its own name. You can change the domains. If you click on domain settings, I think you can click add custom domain. No, there's a place to actually change the domain name from Boring Shannon to something else. Oh, edit site name. There it is. So you can change it from Boring Shannon to whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to call it GCS Week 12 API. Don't you call it the same thing because they have to be unique. Or you can just leave it as whatever it is. And then to get there, you can just click the link up in the top left-hand corner, just underneath your settings. And it will go there, and you should get a page not found. And why are we getting page not found?
Because there's no page.
Because there's no index there. That's correct. But we don't care about that because that's not really the directory we care about. What's the directory we care about? Sorry, what's the file we care about? Data.json. So you should be able to go to /data.json and you should see your JSON. It's not very pretty in my browser. Who's using Firefox out of curiosity? Is yours loading up really nice and pretty and you can actually interact with it? Yeah. The Firefox one loads up a little nicer. So we want to make sure that our headers are actually working and that we're able to access this without a big error, right? So the way we can do that, we need to go to another page, any other page. So first, copy your URL, okay, so that you have it. Okay, once you have it copied, just navigate to any other page, even if it's localhost. Open up your console, type in fetch, paste in the link as the argument, as a string. Make sure you use your link, not my link, because you want to make sure that your link is working. And if you hit enter, you should not get a CORS error. I'm getting a CORS error on mine. It's very likely my header file is not up or it's incorrect.
Sorry, I missed that part.
You're going to do fetch your link, paste it in, and then hit enter. Are you getting a CORS error? Maybe there's something wrong with my actual header file here. Let me double check. Oh, it's because I called it header. It's actually called headers. So right click on it, rename the file to headers. Rename that file to headers, because it's not header, it's headers with an S. That's why Netlify didn't see it properly. Once you've renamed it, you're going to open up your GitHub Desktop. You're going to notice that the file has changed. You should see a little minus sign beside it. Basically what that means is it's going to delete the header file. It's going to create a new file called headers, and then we're not going to separate those commits because there's no reason to. They're both the same thing. And we're just going to write renamed to headers from header. That's it. And then I'm going to commit to master. Okay, I'll wait for you guys to catch up a little bit because I think some of you are behind. So you're renaming header to headers. You're going into your GitHub Desktop. And you're going to commit these two files to master. Okay? I just wrote the commit message, renamed to headers from header. I'm going to click commit to master. What's the first thing I do before I push? I pull, exactly. So I'm going to pull. Then I'm going to push to origin. Like I said, it takes about 5 seconds or so for it to update on Netlify. So well, did it update pretty fast for you? Yeah. So once it's updated, you should be able to just refresh, and that CORS message should disappear. Right? Actually, I still need to run the command. It's good. We have a promise. Yep, my promise resolved. Everything's good. All right, it's 5:43. Do we want to take a break before we work with our JSON data? Yeah, another 15-minute break? All right. Or do you want to power through and leave early?
No.
Who wants a break? Okay, we'll take a break. Pause. Okay, so now we know for sure that we can access and erase this wonderful thing. Now that you guys know the 4 steps of GitHub, or Git in general. Alright, hold on, I want to write this again. Right? Don't use this thing. Don't use -f. Alright, introducing APIs. So often we want to use third-party data with our applications. APIs, not better known, they're better known as APIs, but it stands for Application Programming Interface, provide methods for us to access data. Now, it's often that most people confuse, well, don't confuse, but they associate APIs. They associate APIs with RESTful APIs. Okay? APIs are literally like the browser API, so the JavaScript API that's built into your browser is an API, right? ES 5 and 6, when they get layered in there, they are APIs. jQuery that you pull down is an API. Libraries are APIs. Those are all APIs. But we generally associate APIs with RESTful APIs. RESTful APIs are the ones where you type in a URL and receive back data. That's what you're used to doing. That's what we just built. We just basically built a RESTful API where we send a query string, right, our path, our API path, and then that returns back our data based on that API path. In the summer semester, if you have me, we'll be looking extensively at RESTful APIs because we'll wind up using them in order to communicate from React to our server. That way you get the experience of learning how to deploy an API and work with API data and how to also query your API. RESTful APIs are very common. However, they are not the only API out there. Like I said, it's any third-party library. In addition to REST being a common one, there was also one for a while that people thought were going to be like the replacement, which was SOAP, but SOAP is garbage. RESTful APIs are much easier to work with than SOAP is. They make a lot more sense, they're clearer, and they work with JSON as opposed to working with XML, which is what SOAP works with. All right, so SOAP. I can't remember what it stands for. RESTful's representational state transfer is what RESTful stands for. But I don't know what SOAP stands for. You have to look it up. I mean, you've got a computer in front of you, Alex. There's a website called Can I Google That For You? And all it does is literally type in the Google string and then show you the result sets. It's really kind of funny. Okay, so the one thing about RESTful APIs that you will need to know right now are these verbs. These are called HTTP verbs, and you guys have used them already, even not even realizing it. Every time you go to your web browser and you type in an address, you're firing off the first verb. You're performing a GET request, right? Every time you actually type in something into your address and hit enter, you're firing off a GET request. When the GET request gets sent out and loads up the page, every single image is also firing off a GET request. Your CSS file, if it's external, it's firing off a GET request to go get the CSS file. When you want to get the JavaScript file, again, another GET request. Any CDNs, GET requests. Any API calls that are retrieving data, GET requests. But one that you've also used, you guys did PHP already, right? Yeah. You built CRUD systems where you did create, read, update, and delete. Okay. So you've also done the second one, post. Post is when we take our data from our form or from really anything. You don't necessarily need to post a form. You can post any kind of data. Anyways, you can post the data. Post basically tells the server that, hey, I want to modify, mutate, delete, add, basically anything kind of destructive. It says, I want to do this destructive thing. That's essentially what it's for. These don't always necessarily get used correctly. I've seen GET requests to delete data before. That's quite often because people are too lazy and they don't want to build forms in order to send a delete. Incidentally, when you log out, you're actually deleting. But people don't want to go through that step, so they just write a link for it, right? But you should technically be using post. Model view controller systems, even component-based systems, anything with a router, essentially, anything that controls routing, they will actually create these verbs as well, put, patch, and delete. Put, patch, and delete are a part of the HTTP specification. However, they are not natively implemented in your browser. No idea why. But in frameworks, they do utilize them. Put and patch are for updating or modifying data, and delete is self-explanatory, right? So generally the way it works, we use get when we want to read data, we use post when we want to create brand new data, we use put and patch when we want to modify existing data, and we use delete when we want to delete or remove existing data. Those are the 4 verbs in a nutshell. In the summer semester, we actually spent a whole class talking about verbs, okay? Our simple API is likely using what HTTP verb then? Are we modifying the data? No, we're not deleting it. We're not writing new data. So what are we using? Get. Exactly, we're using get. So one of the problems that we're going to face right now, we're using the fetch API, and the fetch API is perfectly okay in every browser current from 2015 to now. So any browser from 2015 to now has access to the fetch API. Okay? Anything before that, you have to use something called the XHR. The thing is we don't need to worry about that because we can use something called a polyfill, right? Anybody drywalled before? Right? You know what polyfill is? You fill in holes with polyfill, right? This is kind of the same idea. Our browser, let's pretend we're using IE, right? We're using IE10. IE10 has a big gaping hole in it like somebody punched a hole in the wall, right? So you come along with your fetch polyfill and you add it into the browser, and now IE has fetch, and you've filled in the hole. Okay? So we're going to use something called a polyfill, and I've already included it for you in the lesson folder. So we need to go back to the lesson folder. We're done with this repository folder. We can actually close it. We want to go back to our lesson folder where we originally created the JSON. And if you look at your file structure, you will see a file in there called fetchumd.js. That is our polyfill library for fetch. And that will basically, the way it works is if our browser does not have fetch natively, it will give it fetch. So what it basically does is wrap the XHR API and make it available. If that's not available and we're even older than that and we're using like ActiveX objects and stuff like that to do Ajax, it will wrap all that and do that. But either way, all we need to worry about is that we have access to fetch. That's all we care about. We don't need to care about how the implementation is. So that's the fetch UMD. And it's already included. If you look at the index8.html, scroll to the very bottom of the file, you will see right here, just above jQuery, there's the fetch for us to be able to use. Okay? All right. That is that. I want to open up our main.js file that we have. So open up the main.js file. It's in the root of the folder. And the first thing we want to do is actually write the request string for our request URL. We're just going to store it into a variable just to make our lives a little simpler. So we're going to write const. I'm going to call it request URL. You can literally call it whatever you want. That'll be a string. And then you're going to paste your URL to the data.json file that you guys created and put up on Netlify. You're going to paste that URL in there. Okay. Just like we did in the browser where we typed in fetch, that is the first part of what we need to do in order to fetch the data back to us so that we can work with it. So we're going to do that. We're going to type in fetch. We're going to pass it our variable called request URL. I'm just going to open up this thing so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, and then we just save it. No semicolon. And there's a reason for that. The reason why we're not going to do a semicolon is because we're going to use chaining, right? Object chaining. What's going to happen is fetch is going to reach through the internets, right? And say, hey, GCS week 12 API.netlify.com. Actually, it's just going to say, hey, netlify.com. Do you have a file called data.json in this subdomain folder called GCS week 12 API? And Netlify is either going to respond with a yes, I do, or it's going to say no, or it's going to say, CORS, you can't come here, go away, right? But we bypass CORS. We made it all so it's cool and we're fine, so we should get a good response back from them. By the way, I'm way oversimplifying it. It literally goes through like 6 servers to get to that point, to get back to us. But we'll talk about that in the summer. All right, so fetch request URL. Now I'm ready to do, I should finish this up. Fetch makes a promise. It makes a promise that it's going to go get this. It doesn't make a promise that it will actually get it. It just makes a promise that it's going to try, right? And it says, I promise to try to do this. And then when it's done, whether it gets it or not, it's going to say, I completed my promise. I fulfilled my promise. So we can actually tap into that and say, okay, I want to know when you fulfilled your promise. So we can use something called .then. .then basically says, the promise is finished. I can now call .then and deal with whatever fetch resolved with. Okay, so fetch will resolve with an argument. Usually, if we're lucky, it will be the response. Okay, fetch is wonderful. .then is this wonderful method that takes a callback, right? As many of the JavaScript methods seem to do. Now, if we write just .then, all that's going to happen is fetch is going to resolve, then it's going to call .then for us, and execute whatever the definition is inside this function. So we want to make sure that we get back the response from fetch, so we need to pass it through our callback through the argument, right? So we need to put a variable name in there. I'm going to call it response, because that seems to be the most logical.
The arrow function also works.
Yeah, arrow function would totally work. Yeah, this is fine. Yeah, this context works. All right, and then I'm just going to console that log so you can see it. Response. And there we go. We have our response. And there's a whole whack of information about the response. It tells you the type of the response. It tells you the address that it tried to access. It tells you whether or not it was redirected. It gives us an HTTP status. It tells us that everything was okay. There's a whole bunch of pieces of information, and if you click the little block, you can see the other information there. I'm just going to, come on. There we go. You can see all the pieces here. You can actually open up and see the other information if it returned back objects. But you're going to notice there's one thing here called body. Generally, when we get back an API response, we usually want the body, because the body contains the data that we want. If we click this, you're going to notice it's actually an object called readable stream. What that basically, I'm not 100% clear on what that is. I think it's just the stream of JSON. It means that the response hasn't finished, like it's not entirely complete. Either way, even if I'm wrong, this returns a promise as well. So we actually have to use .then a second time. So under step 4, first we want to return this. So we're going to return response, and I want to return it in a JSON format. So we're going to use a method that's available on it called .json. That's going to return a promise, which I can catch with .then. It takes a callback. And this time, this promise resolution will actually be our data in a JSON format. Hopefully. Hopefully, if everything is golden, we will get the data in a JSON format. So I'm going to type data as the argument, and then I'm going to console.log out data. And save it. And if you did everything correctly, you should see your gigantic JSON object sitting inside the console there. And you can click it just like you do any object, because it is a literal object with properties and values. And the cool thing is even though these were all wrapped in strings, You can see now they're just properties. So you can literally call them with dot property on every single one of them, which is kind of neat. You can see here that I have my array. It even tells me it's an array. This is an object, right? So if I click on it, no, that's an array. This is an object. I can click on it. There's my dimensions. There's the name. I can click on that. There's all the details for it. You can see it's attaching the proto to each piece. Like if it's an object, it attaches the object proto. If it's an array, it attaches the array proto to it. Right? Just like a regular literal object. We get the whole JSON back, and it's very simplistic for us to work with after that point. Now, the one thing to understand, due to asynchronicity, which, wow, I said that perfect. Usually I stumble on that one. Due to asynchronicity, there's an issue with timing, right? I can't just be like, cool, I got data, so I'm going to go ahead and, I'm just going to assign this data to a variable. I'm going to be like, I don't know why I'm a Californian right now, but whatever. I'm going to do const datum equals data, right? Oh, I can't do that. Oh, I'll make it global, right? We'll just make it flat out global. It should be available everywhere in our application, right? Cool. Now I'm going to do console.log datum. And I'm going to save. Do you think Bob's Bait and Tackle Shop is going to be inside datum? Or do you think it's going to be undefined? How many people say undefined? How many people think it will contain data? Okay. Let's do what we usually do. Actually, we're going to get a reference error. Datum is not available. That's fine. That's likely on me. We'll just let datum, right? We'll just define it outside. Cool. It's undefined. Why do you think it's undefined? No idea? What's that?
It's not JSON.
It's due to asynchronicity. So JavaScript works like kind of a little bit strangely, right? So when I make a request for something in JavaScript, JavaScript doesn't read line by line by line by line. It reads, this takes X amount of time, so I'm going to complete it. Oh, this one's taking a little longer, but I'm not going to wait for it. I'm just going to move on to the next line and continue on. And that's exactly what's happening in this scenario. Fetch, we don't know how long, because we can't predict it, we don't know how long the responding server is going to take to send us a response, do we? We have no idea. Like, it could take 10 minutes, right? Who knows what we're requesting? So it's not going to wait. JavaScript is not going to wait for it because it's all about asynchronicity. It's all about speed. It's like, you ever seen that meme with the little owl and it's like walking along and it's like, I got important owl shit to do, right? That's exactly what JavaScript is like. JavaScript's like, I got important JavaScript shit to do. I'm not going to wait for your stupid fetch. You can wait for your fetch. That's your problem. That's not my problem. I'm going to move on and I'm going to console log datum. I don't have any data in datum. I don't care. I'm console logging it anyways. That's your problem. You go figure out your stuff. So in order for me to deal with that issue, because this is like this, in order for me to be able to utilize this data, I have a few different things I can do. I have callbacks, right? I can use a callback and say, okay, when you're done and you've got data, call this function. That's totally fine. We can do that, right? I can use callbacks. I can use more promises. I can wrap this whole thing in a promise and then say, hey, when this whole thing's done, now execute this stuff because it's finished, right? I can use async and await. Async and await is cool because it's basically like, hey, stop the world. Do not continue through your application. Stop. Wait for me to finish my stuff. Now you can proceed, okay? So we have multiple different ways, but for simplicity, I think we'll just use a callback because it's simple, it's easy to understand, and it's quite easy to work with. So we're going to create a function called wheezgotsdatum. So I'm going to write function wheezgotsdatum. Okay, it's going to receive an argument called data. And then all of my code that's going to do stuff with data is going to go inside that function. So everything I'm going to do from here on in will be within that function. So up here, I'm going to change my .then. Like I said, it just calls a callback. So I'm going to wipe out this callback that's currently in there. And what am I going to write? We's got datum. With the parentheses? No, because it's just a function definition. It will automatically pass its response to this argument and fill it out for us. And we can prove this by just writing console.log data inside the We's got datum method. Hit save, and there's Bob's Bait and Tackle Shop. So that's a little cleaner, right? Granted, async and await would be even a little cleaner than that, but like I said, it's a bit beyond the scope of what we're doing. Plus, we would need a lot more polyfills. Async and await is basically you wrap a thing in a promise, and then you say, I want to stop everything until this thing has completed. And so it basically stops it. So it won't allow it to continue until it's done. And then the await will basically, whatever you wrap in the await will wait for that promise to finish, and then it will execute. If I remember it correctly. Yeah, it's like one way for dealing with it. This is another way. Another way to deal with it is using events, which is what I've been doing all week. I've been using events. I fire off an event when the data's done, and then I execute a block of code once that event has occurred. Just the same as if you were to do a click event, a submit, or anything like that. I run an on event and fire it off. Either way, you're going to be wrapping your logic in a function. Like, I really don't see any way around that.
You can say, like, is this the efficient way, or?
Like, just stop and do like a synchronous call?
Is the synchronous efficient or the callbacks?
Definitely this. Because then you're not blocking the rest of your code. Your code can continue to execute. Your code can listen. So likely in your code, you're not just going to be listening for data. You're going to have on-click events. You're going to have submission events, all those things. And you want that to get bound while it's waiting for whatever it's doing, right? So you want to make sure all that stuff still happens. If you stop the world, none of that is occurring. It waits till the data comes in. Then it will bind all those things and finish off the script. There are ways to do synchronous calls to data where you can literally stop everything and it won't move on with the script until the data comes back, and then it will proceed. And that's like a synchronous AJAX call. There's libraries that support that. There's tons of things that support that. But it's always frowned upon because that's not what JavaScript was meant to be run like. JavaScript's meant to be asynchronous. And you kind of just have to embrace the idea that you have to wrap shit in a function all the time. It's kind of annoying, but this is what you do, right? If you really want to embrace it, research functional programming. Yeah. So we're going to remove the callback, which we did, and replace it with the We's got datum, right? And just to complete this out a bit, we're going to write some extra pieces here. So I'm going to take this closing bracket, and I'm just going to move it down to, let's see here. Where did I move it on this one? Whew, the closing line. So line 51 is where I'm going to move it down to. So, nope, that's not how I do it. I can never remember how to move the line. Is it Command Control? Yes, Command Control. Whew, no. There we go. Putting it down to the bottom of the page here. Because everything here, we're going to wrap inside this function. And it looks like this stuff here I kind of have in the wrong spot. Step 2 should actually move up. There we go. This thing's going to move up. And I'm going to tab it in. Nice. There we go. Everything's nice and clean now. So under step 3a, we're going to select and store the company in an H that's currently in an H2. So I'm going to say const company equals document dot query selector, right? Hashtag company. Cool. And I actually think I have these things on the page. Let's see here. Need to fetch our URL. Oh, it's in the other file. My apologies. You're going to want to open up the JSON APIs part 2 is what you're going to want to do. Open up the index file for that so you can see this modification. So what it's going to do is when I'm done, we're going to change this out with Bob's Bait and Tackle Shop so that you can actually see it, unless you have a different company name. Did anybody actually make up a different company name? Just Alex. All right. Thank you for being creative. I actually appreciate that. Company.text content equals data. And there's a few different ways we can do this, but because it's an object, we can use the wonderful dot syntax, right? Company name. And save. And it should change to Bob's Bait and Tackle Shop. We're only doing a few of these because next week will literally be the lab and the review, and then we're done. So that's cool. So the lab will actually take all that data and we'll fill it out through a website and finish off the website. That'll be a good review too, using document.selector and stuff, or query selector. All right, so now we want to select and store the slogan tag, right? So we're going to do const slogan equals document.querySelector hashtag slogan. And then to output the slogan, it's just slogan dot text content equals data.slogan. And then there's the slogan. Which, interestingly, nobody laughed. Nobody got the pun. I thought it was amusing. Oh well.
Never laugh at your own jokes.
That's so true, is it not? Yeah, that's definitely true. All right, last, we're going to go and grab the products. So we're going to go const product. No, we're grabbing product dimensions. And spit out each product name and dimensions. Oh, right, product dimensions. That's what we want. Product dimensions equals document dot query selector hashtag product dimensions. After that, we're going to create a variable just to store the products themselves. So we're going to say products equals data.products. Just so it's a simpler thing. Maybe it's an extra step that's not really necessary, but that's fine. Then we're going to iterate. It's an array, so what's the best iteration I could do? What's that? Yeah, for of. I like the for of way. I'm not actually a big fan of the for each. It does weird things. And I've had it run asynchronous on me before, which is weird. I didn't think it could. Product of products. There we go. That's going to close down here on just before the other one. So it'll be encased in there like that. So let's create let prodi equal document dot create element. And I know we haven't really talked about create element, but I'm pretty sure you can guess what it does. The only thing to note that's kind of a bit confusing about the about create element would be that a lot of people think when they do it, it immediately creates an element on the page. Does it? No, it doesn't. What do we have to do? We have to append it, exactly. What it actually creates is known as a document fragment, which is, it's an HTML element, but it's in memory, right? It's just sitting there in memory. It's not actually attached to our DOM yet. We can't really do anything with it, like visually. What we have to do is take it and append it, and then we can interact with it like we would on the DOM. We can attach everything to it, though. You can attach all the CSS, all the text, any bindings, and then attach it when you're, like, append it to the DOM when you're ready. So you can, like, set it up and get it ready, basically. So For example, we're going to add text content to ProDie equals some dirty backticks. And we're going to use wonderful string interpolation. And we're going to call product.name and use some colons. And then this is kind of long, but it's like product.dimensions.height in centimeters. And I'm going to use a little x. And then product.dimensions.width in centimeters. And then x, whoops, product.dimensions.length in centimeters. And you'll notice, even though I've saved, it's not on the page yet. It actually attaches to the page in the last step, which will be product dimensions, which is our element, dot append, ProDie. So that's going to append that to the parent element we selected further up on the page. And there we go. If you did it correctly, you should see worms, 10 by 10 by 20, minnows, 10 by 10 by 20, leeches, 10 by 10 by 20, blue whales, 300 by 400 by 3,306, and then a kraken. And the coolest part about that, this data is not on our site. It's not located locally. We are actually retrieving that data remotely using our API fetch and pulling our data back so that we can work with it. Now, interestingly enough, in Chrome, there's an extension called cores, or no cores, sorry, that you can download that will make dealing with cores really simplistic when you're developing. So if you're hitting an issue where you're on a local host machine and you can't access a remote origin API, and the only reason is because you're on localhost and it won't allow you to do that, you can download the no cores extension for Chrome, install it, turn it on, and then that should allow you to bypass that issue. Okay? Just keep that in mind if you're ever developing and you're getting cores issues and it's just development. You shouldn't have the issue. Then you can use that for it. Other than that, that is all I got for you today, because we're definitely not going to get into the second lab because it'll take too long. Next week, it'll be just the lab and then a review for the final, and then that's it. That's the final. So, cool. Hope you guys have a great weekend.